Hi there, students. Wiggle room. Wiggle room. Okay, wiggle room is leeway. It's the freedom or the opportunity to change something, to do something slightly differently in order to reach an agreement or get something done. Because very often you're given instructions and you've got to do exactly A, B, and C. But there's no wiggle room, there's no wriggle room, there's no leeway, there's no opportunity to change something. You need to leave your negotiator some wiggle room in order to negotiate a deal. Because if you just insist on things and there's no wiggle room, it can be very difficult to reach an agreement. So flexibility in options or interpretation. So the wording of the contract is a little bit ambiguous and therefore it leaves some wiggle room. Okay, wiggle room, the opportunity to make alternative decisions, to follow different courses of action, but only small changes. Yeah, not a big one. Yeah, not a massive change. So I was given some wiggle room, and instead of accepting £100, I accepted 98. That's wiggle room. If I accepted 50, that's not wiggle room. That's a lot more than wiggle room. Yeah? Okay, so wiggle room is just a little bit of minor flexibility to give you the possibility of closing a deal. Scope for negotiation. Scope to modify a previous decision. I think one of the problems with legislation is very often it offers very little wiggle room. It's got to be interpreted in this way. I think the law in itself, however, has lots of wiggle room because it depends on the interpretation. So wiggle room, leeway, latitude. Okay, so a salesman has some wiggle room to reduce the price of what he's selling. The language of the contract is too vague. It leaves too much wiggle room. Okay, so if you buy your clothes just a little bit larger than your size, it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to do other things with them. Okay, so wiggle room, opportunity to change, scope for freedom of thought, scope for freedom of action, a little bit of room to maneuver, a little bit of latitude. Okay, so it's best to make an agreements with a little bit of wiggle room. Because if there's no wiggle room, that can cause tremendous stress. When politicians are left with very little wiggle room, that's when they probably make bad policy. Okay, so a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of leeway to change things. So the ambiguity leaves a little bit of wiggle room. I like to have some wiggle room in my budget for extra expenses because there are always things that you didn't foresee that you were going to buy. Don't be absolutely dogmatic. Let people have a little bit of wiggle room. I think with teenagers, you need to give them a little bit of wiggle room to make their own decisions. We probably need to give them quite a lot of wiggle room, but wiggle room's normally smaller. Our finances are really tight at the moment, and there's no wiggle room for extra expenses. Okay, so to wiggle is to move backwards and forwards. If you've got a tooth that's loose, you can wiggle it. It moves about. It's wiggly. It's not fixed. Yeah, but it moves in place, but with close limits, and that's the idea of to wiggle. to wiggle something, to move it backwards and forwards. You move it from side to side in small movements. You could wiggle your finger, yeah. You could wiggle your hips. But wiggle room, a little bit of space, just the possibility of little movements, and that's really the origin of this phrase wiggle room. Formality, I think I'm going to give it a 4 in formality. Use it in an informal conversation, use it in a semi-formal conversation, in a semi-formal writing, but stop there. Yeah, and nothing more formal, but it's on the more informal side. So enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Wiggle room.